Good
Great.
afternoon, everybody. Hi, Dr. Sue. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Minh?
Am I getting your name right?
Perfect. Thank you for
Oh,
asking.
okay. I just want to be sure because of the spelling.
Yes.
Well, I'm super excited to talk to you. This is my very first IG Live. I feel like I'm coming out of a cave after a year of not doing live events.
The other day I saw someone who was on their first Zoom of ever, and I thought, wow, there's one person. So I'm going to toast your Instagram debut with some soy milk, which
Oh, that's so sweet.
which I wish you would sell actually, because I would only buy your soy milk. But anyway, here's some soy milk for you.
Thank you. You're already putting in a plug.
I really want you to make soy milk.
We'll try. I think, our soy milk is delicious, and I'll find a way to get it to more people. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds
Um,
good.
yeah, but I'm super excited to talk to you. I've been reading your book for the last couple of days. This book right here, for those of you who don't have it.
Thank you.
And I was thinking about when I was reading your book, it's such a unique book in my mind, right? And before we launch into it, because I have a lot to say about the book and about tofu, and you and I can go on for a long time, even though we've only worked together briefly many years ago through a culinary event. I think you were cooking at the time, is that right?
I think I had just starting my teaching program at Kaiser nearby in Mission Bay when you had that event.
That's right.
And yeah, it was great. I got to sample all of the Hodo products, and what I loved is that they were displayed in a way that wasn't just Asian, which is I think how a lot of people think about tofu.
Got it. Yeah. So I love to hear a little bit more about you, your journey, which is written in the book. And in particular, I'm interested in sort of your upbringing, actually. So, I know you have Taiwanese heritage. You're married to a Trinidadian, which is really cool. But were you born and raised here?
I was, but in a place that's quite unusual. So I was born in Lexington, Kentucky.
Okay.
So yeah, you're giving me this invitation to tell my whole life story, so I'll try to tell it
Go for
briefly.
it.
So my parents were among the first Asian immigrants who were allowed to immigrate in 1967. They came from Taiwan as
Hmm.
graduate students, and they ended up in Rhode Island at Brown University, which is where I ended up going for college and medical school many years later.
Wow.
So you can imagine this, late 60s, small town New England, and my parents coming from Taiwan, first, plane trip ever,
Mm.
ever in their lives, coming from, you know, rural backgrounds in Taiwan. It was a big deal. So they came over here, and I feel like I still need to learn a lot about that story because I imagine it's pretty fascinating with difficulties also. But then my father ended up doing his postdoc at University of Kentucky in Lexington, which is where my
Okay.
brother and I were born in the early 70s. I only lived there, I like to say, for the first 6 months of my life when I was still pre-verbal, so I didn't get the accent. And then they moved back to Rhode Island. So I spent my toddler and early childhood years in Rhode Island.
Got it.
And then most of my childhood on Long Island, New York, in a semi-rural area without really any other people of color around. Like literally, I lived in a very small town. It was so small that our street address didn't even have a house number. They didn't need it. There were so few people there. We were on a rural route number one. But the interesting thing I think about that and how it relates to my food journey is that the reason why my parents ended up all the way out there in a semi-rural part of Long Island is that there was a national laboratory there, Brookhaven National Laboratory, where they're
Hmm.
working as scientists. And the reason why that's really key in my story is that they always had visiting scientists from around the world, from everywhere,
Got
small
it.
countries, big countries, all kinds of places. And we would have potlucks occasionally and have all these people over. It was like the United Nations. And so I got to taste food from around the world in a place where otherwise the only food would be my mother's Taiwanese cooking, and then the Jewish, Italian, and Polish cooking of the people who lived in town, my
Right.
friend's family.
Right.
Um, which is also great that I got exposed to that. But I think that international exposure really shaped my vision of food and my openness to other cuisines and cultures.
Well, that's exactly what I was curious about, because when I read your book, I wasn't sure. Like, you know, it's so eclectic, it's so global, and we don't talk about spices enough in the U.S. So
Yeah.
I was wondering whether, you know, your upbringing was possibly in Taiwan or in Singapore, where you spent some time. But it's really fascinating to hear that so much of your journey began not so much in foreign countries per se, but having foreign country folks coming to your house to cook with you.
Yeah, yeah, it was really a luxury and I think pretty unique. You know, when you said that this is a unique cookbook, I really think I'm the only one who could have written this particular cookbook, right? So I journey through, you know, four areas, actually, large areas of the world: California, Asia, the
Right.
Mediterranean, and Trinidad in the book. And it is an unusual collection, but the reason why I chose those is that, you know, they're all places I have a personal connection to, and
Right.
they're all places that use spices. So we were just talking the other day about how even in, you know, our finest Michelin-starred restaurants here in California, which we're so lucky to have, and which I've been lucky to sample some of, you don't really get spices. You get really excellent ingredients in general, especially produce. But spices, I would say with the exception of Murad, where I had the chance to be
Right.
culinary extern when I was in culinary school, and has tons of spices, most places don't actually get that adventurous. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And when I read your book, the first chapter is, first of all, it's great that you pay homage to all the places you love and the type of foods that you love. So that's really fantastic. But in the first chapter about California, um, you know, and in particular, when we think about the Bay Area, it's really freshness. It's
Hmm.
really eating seasonably, eating
Hmm.
with highlighting the freshness of the produce and the
Hmm.
protein, freshly um, bought or freshly fished or freshly cut. So I think we're so used to that, and they're delicious. But I'm excited to talk about spices because I grew up in a place where not only do we, which is Vietnam, not only do we eat a lot of spices, but we also eat a lot of fresh spices like herbs.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
like in Vietnam, there is no country that I know of, even throughout Southeast Asia, where spice herbs are eaten fresh as much as we do in Vietnam.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's fascinating, actually, the wide variety and the attention to freshness, right? And so that's a way
Right.
in which Vietnamese cuisine is actually very similar to Bay Area cuisine. It's like you want the best. You will reject any slightly wilted herb, I'm sure, and you use them so abundantly. Like I love that in Vietnamese cuisine, you eat herbs like you would eat other vegetables, as opposed to
Exactly.
just a precious little garnish.
No, I think that's really for me. You know, people ask, "What is my journey of food?" And you know, I've always been an eater. Like my credit card bill is 90+% food.
Same.
So, right. So that really just gives me no choice but to go into the food business. But
Right.
for me, when I think back about my upbringing, I was literally held by the hands by both of my grandmothers on a daily basis to go to our local fresh markets in Vietnam. And my grandmother would teach me how to pick all the best produce and protein. I mean, literally, like, look at this, squeeze that, smell that, look at the stem, feel the weight, you know, look at the eye, look at the gill,
Yeah.
smell the meat. It was so amazing that I took it all for granted. But today, it's what I teach my kids. And I feel like I can walk around the neighborhood, go into any grocery stores, and just pick the best stuff. So California is a great place for me to start Hodo.
Yeah, I think so. So, Min, I think people would love to hear more about your story too. When did you come from Vietnam and how did you get to Hodo? Because I know just like with my route to becoming, you know, a cooking teacher and professionally trained chef, it was not direct.
Yeah, I think I know you went to the San Francisco Culinary School, which is a
Yep.
great place for anyone who want to transition into the food world.
Yes.
I've given talks there a bunch of times, and for me, I think food is so second nature. I grew up with it. So when I came here, I still remember I came here as an immigrant in 1981, in that whole wave of boat people that left Vietnam in the 70s and in the 80s. So I remembered the very first grocery store I went into. It was overwhelming. It was amazing. You know, I've never seen so much food in one building, but not only that, but I've never seen so many variety concentrated in one place and packaged so beautifully. That was my very first impression of the grocery store. I mean, even the apples were all lined up, you know, and it's
Yeah.
such a contrast to everything that I've grown up seeing. But I was really excited about it,
Yeah.
you know, because it was neat, it was clean, it was bright, it wasn't wet. And very quickly, I got used to it until 30 years later, you know, when I realized that I really like food and I want to start a food business and quit my investment banking job to do that. That journey started with the farmers market, which is a full cycle of going back to the wet market in Asia for me.
Yes.
And
That's
how
amazing.
I ended up with tofu, it's simply because it's one of the best foods that I grew up eating. You know, and you know, in the morning, throughout Asia, you can go into an alley, a small neighborhood, and there's a tofu shop and a soy milk shop. In particular, in Taiwan, there are so many.
Oh, yes.
So, and they say the sense of smell, the memory of smell, it's the longest, and that's so true for me. Like I can smell a tofu shop from a mile away. And so for me, I think a lot of my influence in wanting to start tofu is from that. And then seeing how there's really no fresh, organic, you know, delicious tofu in the Bay Area. And that's the main reason why, you know, silly me, I started a tofu business and, you know, 15 years later, it became, it's got a life of its own.
Lucky for all of us, truly. I mean, it's amazing. I love it that you, as a young child, upon arrival in this country, were amazed by the supermarket, were impressed by the supermarket, and still remember that feeling.
Yeah, and so, but you know, so much has changed now. These days, we're very lucky in the Bay Area with so many farmers markets, and thanks to the farmers market, you know, Hodo got its starts there, and and you know, I'm excited to talk to you because I think for the very first time, I'm hoping that we can answer a lot of the questions that I was asked at the farmers markets when I first started the tofu business, and I didn't really have answers to. So you're the very first doctor that I have the honor of speaking to who's written an amazing cookbook and knows so much about food and medicine and nutrition. So I'll throw out a question out there that I'm reminded of at the Berkeley farmers markets.
Yeah.
Okay? And as you know, this is North Berkeley. This is about a decade ago, and lots of really curious customers, which I love about the farmers markets.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest questions that I found that I couldn't answer was not so much about how do you make tofu, how do you cook with tofu, which we'll get into, but you know, I hear that tofu is good for you. That's the question. So how is it good for me? Right? And then I struggle and I was like, well, I'm not a doctor, right? I've eaten it all my life. Lots of people have eaten it in Asia for thousands of years, but I really don't know. Like, why is tofu good for you? What is it about tofu that's good for you? So now I'm putting you on the spot as a doctor, as a chef. Help us understand that.
So I find this fascinating because I think like you, right? My appreciation of tofu from a food perspective is ingrained. You know, I was born eating tofu.
Right.
It was always there, and I always appreciated, you know, the best tofu, the tofu that tasted the purest, the freshest, that where I could taste that soybean taste. Where I think this might be why when I hear people saying, "Oh, tofu is bland," they haven't had Hodo. They haven't had good tofu, actually. They haven't had actually even the average tofu in Asia, I would have to say.
Right.
And so it's a curious question to me. Interestingly, compared to you, I have not gotten that many questions as a doctor. You know, I've been in practice for more than 20 years. about health benefits or health concerns about tofu, but it sounds like you have, which is so interesting that the consumer comes to you as a provider of the product and
Right.
asks you questions that you actually shouldn't be answering, right?
It kind of makes sense in a way. Like, I'm sure you get asked about how to use tofu
Yeah,
in at home, right?
yeah,
But if
yeah,
you're a doctor and you eat tofu, people will be like, well, she eats tofu. It's gotta
yeah,
be good for
maybe.
her, good for you, good for
Yeah,
all of us. But for
yeah,
me, we have to give also the context of a decade ago,
yeah, true, true.
right? I mean, we know today everyone loves tofu now,
Yeah,
right? Like tofu has seen the biggest jump in sales in the history of tofu in this country this past year, 60%.
that's amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, granted,
Good for you.
plant-based food has seen a rise of like 30%, but
Yeah,
tofu has seen a massive jump.
that's
So people
fabulous.
definitely eat it. And
Yeah.
now maybe they don't ask the same question, like, how is it good for me because it tastes great?
Yeah,
And
so
they know what to do.
let me answer the question though, because I bet you
Okay,
there are
please
still
do.
people
Yes.
who
Let's
came here
let's
thinking, oh,
let's
maybe
let
I'll,
people know.
yeah, exactly. So, you mentioned the rise in plant-based food sales in general this year. And that's great to hear because tofu as a great source of plant-based protein, simply being made from soybeans, is something that is good for our individual health and good for the health of the planet. So, and it's really, you can think of it directly as eating tofu alone, tofu itself as being good for you. But also, I like to have people think about it as tofu as a step away from relying solely on animal protein as your source of protein,
Got it.
because I think that reaches a lot more people, and that's actually very important because you could say I should really just address the people who already only eat plant-based and they'll be totally into this. But actually, there are many, many more people who are not exclusively plant-based who would benefit, again, individually and would benefit our planet from finding other sources of protein. So tofu falls into that category. It's a great source of protein. Soybeans are a great source of fiber, just like all other beans.
Mhm.
Lots of minerals. And all these minerals are great for your heart health, and that's what, number one killer. So those are things like potassium and magnesium, also a source of calcium, tofu in particular because of how it's made. And you can talk about making of tofu. I think that's actually a mystery for a lot of people.
Right.
And so calcium, which is good for our bones. And so those are really the reasons why those are all the nutrients that tofu provides. And then in terms of actual health conditions that eating tofu can help you with, it is preventive for heart disease, high blood pressure,
Wow.
for stroke. So these are all kind of related to vascular disease. All of these are in the same category. Tofu has been shown to be preventive for all of those. So again, our number one killers. It's shown to be possibly preventive for certain cancers. That
Hmm.
includes breast cancer, prostate cancer, stomach cancer. And as I mentioned, it's good for bones, so preventing osteoporosis, which is something which, as we are living longer, affects a lot more people, both men and women.
Thank you. No, that's really wonderful to hear because when I think about the benefits and trying to answer that questions, I remember telling consumers back then, like, you should ask your doctor.
Yeah.
And now we have a doctor live telling us the answer. So that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
But let's go into the making of tofu, to your point. One of the things that I said to people is tofu is really soybeans, to your point. It's a legume. It's a fantastic high protein legume. And I give this story sort of a historical context of tofu is, we read a lot about where tofu came from. But my joke, and I really believe this joke that I'm telling all the time, which is tofu is an accidental discovery. Like anything, like a lot of food, you
Yeah.
know, the way we cook beans, any legumes, it's universal, right? We soak it overnight and then we slow cook it for all that flavors to come out. And I imagine thousands of years ago, somewhere in China, someone is cooking a pot of really yummy soybeans and probably put too much water in it. And then he or she decided to flavor the soybeans. And first with salt, which makes it salty, and then decided to add some vinegar to it. And that vinegar, the acid, really turned the protein in the soybeans into a curd. So in Chinese, the first form of tofu we call is douhua, which is the flour of the beans. So if you take any protein liquid, whether it's nut milk, cow milk, soy milk, and you add acid, you're going to see this, curdle. And to me, that's the discovery of tofu, right? And then we just started to press it. We take all that curd, we squeeze it to get the whey out, and you have a block or a ball of tofu. So it's literally a step removed from just eating whole beans.
Yeah.
And people don't think about it that way. So I want people to know that you're eating a cake, a block that's made of soybeans. It's so wholesome. And the reason that we get that block is it allows us to taste all the flavors of that beans, but not only that, to be able to use that block in a variety of recipes. So now you take one texture, which is the bean texture, and you turn it into so many other textures, but it remains such a wholesome food. And that's where tofu came from.
That's a great story. And I love this idea of, the accidental discoveries, because it's so often that I'll look at a food and I'm like, who figured out that you could eat this, right?
Right.
Right. And so I think that I'm not surprised that tofu sales have risen so much in the past year. Because I think people are eating a lot more legumes. I think people understand, and certainly during the pandemic, right? People were going crazy in panic buying and stocking up on canned and dried beans, and suddenly everyone was making beans. And maybe they realized, oh, beans are inexpensive. Oh, beans have a lot of variety. Right. Beans taste good, and we can cook these in so many different ways. And yet, people who aren't that used to eating beans might be like, I'm tired of that texture. What else can I eat? And again, I think in the beginning of the pandemic, when it was hard to get meat for people who are meat eaters, they were thinking, what else can I eat? So that might be one of the reasons why tofu came to play, because people, I think, are looking for, even though protein isn't everything, I like to emphasize this point, protein is in vegetables too. People think
and nuts, lots of nuts.
And nuts, right? So lots of plant-based sources, not just meat, but people think about a protein as something that you can sink your teeth into, right? So, and in restaurants, in the culinary world, protein actually often refers to meat. So let's change this up a bit, because if you're looking for something to sink your teeth into, a block of tofu is very satisfying. And I think, depending on how you make it, and in particular with the firm tofu that you sell, and then my favorite technique to introduce tofu to people, I'm going to show you some pictures from the book, is to pan fry it. Because once you slice and pan fry tofu, you get something that really isn't too different from the experience of chewing meat for people. So this is a picture for making fresh spring rolls.
Right.
Borrowed from your cuisine, but my Eat the Rainbow, very California version. And what you see
I saw
here,
that recipe.
Yeah, is sliced and pan fried tofu. Really simple. I also use it in the recipe for the tofu teriyaki musubi, which is usually made with Spam, okay, in Hawaii. And nobody, doctor or not, would say that Spam is a health product. But tofu is. And I actually developed this recipe, which involves not just substituting firm tofu that I've pan fried in a teriyaki glaze, a low sodium teriyaki glaze for this, but I also am using Haiga rice, which is a Japanese form of brown rice that is very minimally processed. It's scored so that it cooks kind of more softer, more like white rice, but it has a lot of the nutrition benefits of a whole grain of brown rice.
Right.
At any rate, I made that recipe for my colleagues at Kaiser in Hawaii. So that was a trip that I didn't mind at all. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the biggest challenge. I'm going to take the challenge of giving a substitution for Spam.
That's a bold move.
Right. It is
very brave of you.
I know.
Take on Spam in Hawaii.
I know. And people were like, okay, it's not Spam, but this is good. And so that is why I said I need to include this in the cookbook, because that's kind of the whole idea. I want you to love your food. I know you know, I know human nature from being human, but also from taking care of patients for more than 20 years. Nobody wants to be told what to do. People know what they like to eat. They know the flavors that resonate with them, just like you're talking about your scent memories from early childhood, right? These are all things that I don't think it makes sense to replace, but we can make small swaps in ingredients and make it a little bit better, either for prevention or actually for treatment purposes. You know, there are studies
Right.
that really show that the closer you get to a plant-based diet, the more you will improve your diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, cholesterol, cancer risk, all of those things. These are all the things that will either make us sick when we're hoping to be, you know, active as older people, or actually kill us. And so I feel like, you know, definitely enjoy the pleasure in your food. Food is all about pleasure. It's all about bringing people together and community. And so that's why you can't say, you know, eat this, swallow this pill, or eat this thing.
Right.
I know you love beef, but here, just eat this bland puree of something. That's not going to work for the long term. And so that's where, you know, bringing in tofu, and then I think showing people who may not eat Asian food all the time. I don't eat Asian food all the time. That's why this book covers so much territory. And show them how you can actually bring the flavors of whatever your favorite cuisine is into the tofu, which is what I love that you've done
Sure.
with Hodo. And you know, you should talk about that for people who may not already be buying those products. You have some really like strongly flavored, spice forward products.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, we talked about how many of your recipe and spices are actually in our
Yeah.
products. So for me, I think what I've learned in making tofu, and now we call it plant protein or plant-based foods, is the fact that people definitely have had the experience of eating better food and better tofu. So when I think about healthy eating, like you, I think about taste first and foremost. Nobody will eat anything that's not tasty, even if it's good for them,
Right.
right? And so we're fortunate to be in California. So when I think about taste, I think what you're doing and what I'm doing are similar in that we're giving the venue, the how,
Mm-hmm.
to help people. And granted, you know, a lot of vegetarians and vegans already know what to do. You know, it's been, you know, folks have been experimenting. They probably have a ton of recipes that they have already used with tofu, with beans, with produce and whatnot. So I guess what we're trying to do is make it easier,
Mm-hmm.
more accessible, but also to help people understand the nutritional, the medicine part of the food, from spices, you know, to produce, to tofu. And one of the things that I think you and I also have common in terms of a recipe book and what we do at Hodo is over the years, we're trying to help people understand textures, right? And
Uh-huh.
so for us, we know that we can take tofu and turn it into many different textures.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is very similar to meat protein texture, animal protein texture, but it's purely accidental. And
Yeah.
it's not even new because we have to remember that tofu's been around for thousands of years. And in Asia, all these
Mm-hmm.
mock meats, mock seafood have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's essentially a way to take tofu and fry it or freeze it or press it more to turn it into a texture of your liking. Whether it's animal meat like or not, it doesn't really matter. You
Right.
know, like for a mapo tofu, you can use a soft tofu. You
Mm-hmm.
know, for your musubi, you use a firmer tofu to
Right.
fry. And then for your hot pot, you can use a frozen tofu
Mm-hmm.
or a fried tofu in there. And to me, this is what really exciting for people. And at Hodo, in addition to making these textures, what we realized, and I'm excited to share, is that a lot of our products, to your point, uses a lot of the spices from the Mediterranean, from North Africa. You know, soon we'll be coming up with, you know, Mexican crumbles and such. So it really jives with your cookbook.
It
And it
does.
also forces me, as a tofu maker, to learn about some of these spices, you know, like za'atar, for example, and sumac.
Yeah.
You know, I eat more and more of these spices now because I want to put them into our tofu products.
That's awesome. And again, this will answer that long, standing question or complaint about people saying that tofu is bland. It's like anything is bland if you don't season it properly, right? So, in talking about spices a little bit, I just think spices are so much fun to play with. There are, hundreds of them. There's so many. They bring different cultures into your kitchen, right? They evoke a place. I think that's what's so great about it. For me, you're talking about how you came from the wet markets of Vietnam and you went to this sterile supermarket and you were impressed by the cleanliness of the supermarket. I love a wet market. I just don't wear my best shoes or clothes there. And I'll often bring home, allowable food products as a souvenir. So spices are one of those things that you can bring from other countries. And it's just a great way to remember where you were because you close your eyes, you smell it. That smells like that place, right? The spices smell like the place.
Your idea when I read your book, and many people who read your book quoted the idea of your spice box being your medicine box. It's so beautiful, So maybe you can share with the audience and myself a little bit about some of the spices, your favorite spices, and the medicinal part of spices outside of just the flavors themselves.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about some of your favorite spices.
So I break spices up into the categories of savory or sweet, although there's a crossover also in how to use those. And then, I think I'll start with the spices that we know the most about in terms of having medicinal properties. The one that I think everybody knows about is turmeric and how it's used as an anti-inflammatory.
Ginger, turmeric, that whole category.
Yeah, that whole category. And, it's literally turmeric uses the same receptors in our bodies, the same chemical receptors as ibuprofen, Motrin or Advil. Like literally same mechanism. And so I think that's incredible. Like what's old is new. We had spices long before we had pharmaceuticals. And, in fact, now, of course, people are cashing in on this and trying to make supplements out of the same spices that we started out with. But so anti-inflammatory effect is not just for, ouch, I have, an achy back, but also inflammation is what we're learning is the root of all chronic disease. All those things I've been talking about during this program, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, all of those things are triggered by inflammation. Inflammation has a lot to do with our lifestyle, or, working too hard, not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, not managing our stress well. Those are all the things that are parts of our lifestyle that affect inflammation. But fortunately, there are foods that can help counter that. And that includes spices like turmeric and ginger. And then in terms of, and I just to putting on my doctor hat, things that are bad for you that cause inflammation are pretty much, you kind of know all of that. Refined foods, highly processed foods, sugar, all that stuff causes inflammation. So stepping away from that and cooking kind of more of a whole food diet, whether that includes animal products or not, is a great way to counter that. Those are the categories of spices that fight inflammation. I also love cumin as well, which is used a lot in many cuisines, Indian cuisine, Mexican cuisine. So I'll see what you're going to be doing with your cumin in your upcoming New Mexican seasoning. That is helpful for digestion. It's also a source of iron. And so again, something that, tastes good and is very evocative of a few different cuisines also happens to have health properties. I love cinnamon. So going to some sweet spices, cinnamon is one of my favorites. And in fact, what I find fascinating is that not only is it so sweet that I find it a good way to suggest to people who have a sweet tooth, like dessert, but have to watch their sugar intake, people with diabetes, etc., to use cinnamon instead. It adds a little bit more flavor, and I actually find it to be sweeter to my palate than actually sugar, or at least equal. So it's a great way of reducing your reliance on sugar when you're already having something sweet. But fascinatingly, it also helps regulate blood sugar. Just like that. It's amazing. And also can lower blood pressure. So many well-established health effects of another spice there, cinnamon.
Let me jump in. You're making me think so much about spices. And this is fantastic to hear about the medicinal property of some of these spices. When I was reading your book, you and I have one other thing in common, which is mangosteen.
Oh,
Your favorite fruit.
yes.
It's also my favorite fruit. We call it the queen of fruit, and the king of fruit is the durian. And the reason we call it that is the whole heat and cooling factor in sort of like Asian medicinal thinking.
Right.
And the reason I know this is my grandfather is actually a Chinese medicinal doctor, or was. So what can you tell us in terms of spices, chilies versus cooling spices? Now, you talked about sweet, you talk about anti-inflammatory. What else can you share with us? Because, I mean, it's really, for me, I'm super curious about your thoughts on that.
So, you know, people will ask me things that involve traditional Chinese medicine. And I'm fascinated by it as well. And who knows, maybe in my third career, I'm going to be a traditional Chinese doctor. I actually didn't know that much about these concepts of heating and cooling until I studied abroad in Singapore when I was in college. And it was very much a part of the culture there. Like people, like everyone, you know, whether or not they were very kind of traditionally Asian or not, it seemed like everybody knew this lingo of heating and cooling, which I really learned a lot about when I lived there. And again, with those two things, the durian and mangosteen, as being two examples of that. So I'm not really going to answer from that perspective because I don't have that training, and I'm very careful in, you know, what I will put out there about medicine. But from what we know from a Western and I guess laboratory science-based perspective, let's talk about the chili pepper. So
yes.
Chilies are just, you know, amazing, and there's so much variety. They are used in so many cuisines to add that bit of, you know, heat that people really crave. But what does it do in terms of our metabolism? Some studies have actually shown that it might, there is some, you know, qualification here, maybe not great evidence, might speed up your metabolism. So maybe there's some benefit for people who are struggling with their weight. Other studies have actually shown some potential benefit, again, for heart disease. What that mechanism is less clear. But, you know, overall, you know, as opposed to the idea of heating as being maybe a negative thing in traditional Chinese medicine, depending on your constitution, these are, you know, this is kind of thought to be for everybody. We may have these benefits. And so chili peppers are great for that. And again, they make food, you know, if you think tofu is bland, make it spicy. It's not going to be bland. On your website, I made a video and put the recipe for my Kung Pao tofu recipe. So again, a way of finding something familiar that people love, Kung Pao chicken. I substituted your tofu, and it has all the flavor, slightly different. You know, you don't get the chicken flavor, but really it captures the essence of that dish. And so that involves both lots of chili peppers, which are there really more for slight heat and really dramatic visual effects, and the Sichuan peppercorn.
Thank you. And I don't mean to put you on the spot about the Asian medicine piece.
Yeah.
I was just so fascinated by your knowledge. But I really respect the fact that you're like, hey, I don't know enough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go there quite yet until my third career, perhaps.
Exactly.
You know, the other thing that I love to hear a little bit more about your book, which I have a lot of cookbooks and I don't follow cookbooks. But one of the things I love is that map of what to eat every day.
Oh, yeah.
Of the week. It's so practical. Tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that. Because, I love to hear why that, because I've never seen that on any other cookbook, really.
So that comes from my hat as a cooking teacher. So for those of you who are listening who don't know, I founded a teaching kitchen for patients at Kaiser in San Francisco 5 years ago, now currently virtual. And actually, as a benefit of that, people can take it from anywhere. So take a look at that. Look up Kaiser Permanente San Francisco Thrive Kitchen if you want to cook with me. Next month is actually featuring Asian dishes. But as part of that, oh, there you go. I was looking for mine, but you came up with it first. I'll let you hold it up, so I'll just talk.
Yes.
One of the things that I think is in common for people who don't cook often is not knowing how to meal plan, right? Not making a plan. Planning is everything. And coming up with, I don't know what to eat, you know, what should I eat? And Minh, tell me what page that is so I can I'll hold it up.
This is page 42.
Thank you.
I'm happy to hold it up.
I'll just kind of indicate as I'm going along. So I did this as a every day of the week, Monday through Sunday. And I split it up into week 1, 2, 3, and 4, going across the top, and in the red bar going along the side. Those are the days of the week. But for each week, for each day of the week, I actually have a category, because this is kind of, I think, along the same lines of thinking of how could you eat tofu and not make it be Asian all the time. Think of it actually not as the product itself, but as in flavor categories. So for this, I'm thinking of, think of not a specific recipe, even though this is a cookbook of 175 recipes. But once you know how to cook them, think of it as types of recipes, and then you're not going to find it so hard to cook every day. So I start with the category of pasta / noodles / rice dishes. Then there's one for tacos, wraps, and rolls, rice and beans, soups and stews, breakfast for dinner, entree salads, and stir fries or sautés. So I use all these terms pretty loosely, but again, to get you thinking actually in categories so that you're not relying on another trip to the supermarket just to make that specific recipe that you think you have to make, but you can substitute, one bean for another, one protein for another, tofu for beans. You can, if Tuesday is Taco Tuesday, stretch that a little bit and say, oh, maybe I can make those Eat the Rainbow spring rolls that Linda showed us in her cookbook using Hodo tofu. That's also a taco-like thing. Same idea. You've got a wrap, you put things in it. There's a plant-based protein and you have vegetables, right? So I made this.
Yeah, no, I think it's super practical.
If you look at this one page, I've given you a different recipe for every single day of the month. Your work is done. So if you buy my cookbook just for this page, you're set up. You're set up. But so that whole first section of the cookbook, so the second section or second 4 sections are the recipes. The first section, I tried to distill everything I teach in my cooking classes and more, how to stock your kitchen, what equipment do you need to be a good home cook? Good meaning confident and frequent home cook. That's what I mean by being a good home cook, who can produce homemade food for yourself and your families. I go into the spices. I talk a lot about how to use them, what do they taste like, how to get the most flavor out of them. And I talk about all the best healthy ingredients, which include all the plant-based proteins, legumes, and more.
Yeah, no, I think, it's such a unique cookbook in so many ways, because right next to that page when I was reading is, topics like reconsider leftovers.
Oh yeah.
I love leftovers.
I do too.
Right? And thinking ahead, looking ahead. So I love, in some ways, what I have learned becoming a food manufacturer, and in particular over COVID, the COVID timeframe, it's really being a more flexible cook.
Yeah.
And I think your book really captures that really well, because what it does is, I'll give you an example. Like, I have 2 teenage boys and they love pasta,
mm-hmm.
And I'll make all kinds of pasta for them. Italian style pasta, Asian style pasta. And I use literally the same pasta. Like I would put gochujang in pasta and they love it.
Yeah.
Right? And instead of a tomato sauce.
Yeah.
So for me, it's that substitution element.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, yes, sometimes I'll put fish, sometimes I'll put chicken, other times it's tofu. And it can literally go into any recipe. And I think it goes back to your point earlier, growing up in Asia or when you were living there, we don't need to think about it in sort of like one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We think about it in terms of like, not even about protein, because in Asia, they think about meat protein as flavor agents.
Yes.
They don't think about meat protein as like, I'm going to eat protein.
Right.
They're going to like, I'm going to flavor this with some pork belly.
Right.
I'm going to flavor this with some fish heads.
Exactly. Right. To your point, the other day, Henry, your community manager, used leftover, talking about leftovers again, Taiwanese beef noodle soup broth, and had beef noodle soup without the beef. He had tofu in it. And it's that thing that is actually how meat is used in Asia and in other places too. It's for flavor. It is not the main event. And I think if people take away nothing else from a nutrition perspective from our conversation, that's the way for everyone to go. Yeah.
And I think we will get there in the US. you know, we don't necessarily have, and we're seeing that already,
Yeah.
right? We're seeing people eating plant-based
Mm-hmm.
as substitutes, but also they don't necessarily have to be one or the other.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
you can be omnivore, but eat primarily plant-based.
Right.
And use the appropriate animal protein for the appropriate dish.
Exactly.
Right? Because protein is protein.
Right.
As long as it tastes good, you should totally use it. And ideally, you want a delicious dish that has all, you know, the ABC, the vitamins, the nutritions, and you eat it and it's beneficial for your health.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. So Minh, I'm looking at the time and I feel we're running out soon. I didn't see, because I don't pay attention to the comments. Are there any questions we should be taking right now?
I don't know how to do this, but if I see comments, we should totally address them. We have about 20 people online, which is great. And
let's see. Oh, I'm scrolling. Okay, I'm gonna scroll back. I'll be the moderator because I figured out how to find the comments that have come
okay,
in.
good.
And I'll read it out and we'll just take turns answering.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes.
Yep. Okay, and then people can certainly ask more questions. So let's see. We start out with hi from a lot of places, including Peru.
Yay!
Excellent, excellent. Are you available in Peru yet, Minh?
I'll teach you how to make tofu. I'll help you start a whole tofu business in Peru.
That sounds amazing. Okay, and somebody was excited to try the teriyaki tofu musubi. I knew it. There are some things that people are like, I need a better substitution for that. I'm excited to try that. So yes. Okay, let's see. Okay, someone asked about how many spices do you have to eat before you enjoy its health benefits? Okay, so this is a good question. And I will answer it in a couple of ways. You'll certainly get a more concentrated amount of spices in a capsule. So if you are taking turmeric so that you're taking it instead of Motrin, okay, let's say instead of ibuprofen, you'll get more benefit from the capsule for sure. You'd have to eat a lot more sliced turmeric root or powdered turmeric to get that. And also with turmeric, you get much more better absorption and bioavailability if you combine it with ground black pepper because of piperine. So that's again like ancient wisdom, which coincides with how people actually use these spices, right? Often people are going to be using turmeric and black pepper together. So in general, you'll get more concentrated forms in supplements. That said, supplements, and not everybody knows this, supplements and vitamins are not FDA regulated. So you don't actually know what you're getting, and that's concerning to me. You actually don't know how it was made. You don't actually know the quality or the potency of it. So the other way I like to answer this question about spices is if you incorporate lots of spices and a variety of spices, just like I say, eat the rainbow of foods, a variety of produce every day, you're going to cover your bases. So you may not get that like quick dose response, but overall you're going to be getting the health benefits. That's
a great answer. Turmeric and pepper.
Yes, turmeric and black pepper. Let's see. Imuna from Honolulu asked, what do you like about cooking with flavor and textures of tofu? Again, I love to taste the bean. I love to taste the soybean in my tofu. That is why I like my soy milk. And I do not like any of the packaged soy milks that are sold in regular grocery stores. Everybody out there, whatever soy milk you buy, go to an Asian grocery if you can, or make your own. I have a recipe for soy milk in the cookbook as well, because you'll taste what it's supposed to taste like. The ones that are, shelf stable, certainly, and the ones in the refrigerator that are commercially made taste nothing like soy milk to me. So that's what I love about the flavor of tofu. It has of tofu and soy milk. You just taste this pure, delicious flavor. And texture-wise, going from silken all the way to extra firm, it depends, like you're saying, on what you're making with it. You get really all of the textures in the world, which you don't get from meat. Actually, meat kind of has one texture. Sure, you can change it by how much you cook it, but it's really still the same animal texture. Whereas with tofu, it's very different depending on how you prepare it. Like you were saying, if you freeze it, that makes it absorb sauces and more flavor too.
And one of the things that I personally have done with Hodo's tofu that we don't talk about a lot is the fiber component.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, because when I you know, we don't make, and this is going to answer partially your question of why we don't sell soy milk. Because to make a soy milk, you want a homogenized soy milk that doesn't have a lot of fiber, so it's smooth for drinking. So the soy milk we make for our tofu, it's really, we keep more of the pulp in it. So it's a higher fiber soy milk that we use to make tofu. So as a drinking soy milk, you know, it's not as smooth.
Yes.
It's wonderfully tasty. I still drink it. Right? But our tofu, I purposely leave more fiber because I think that fiber is very beneficial. Right. So we have one of the higher fiber tofu.
Higher fiber and higher protein too, right?
Absolutely, yes. And so we make a thicker soy milk, which is why you love it.
Yeah.
Because it's got all the flavor. And of course, like, you know, beans, besides protein, has also natural sugar, natural fat, right? So if you have a thicker soy milk and a more concentrated equivalent of any milk, it just got so much more flavors. And essentially that's what we're aiming for, is to make a tofu that can stand up to anyone saying that tofu is bland. They'll bite into our tofu and it's buttery and it's nutty and it's got a mouthfeel to it. So I think we've done our job in terms of changing people's mind about tofu. And for those who don't want to cook, you know, go get our Moroccan tofu, our spicy curry nuggets. You know, you literally open the bag and just eat it. And so we're making it convenient for those of you, just like your cookbook, right? There's some more simple recipe. You know, there's the weekly planning, the leftover piece. There's a whole spectrum of ways you can approach tofu from Hodo, just like you would some of the recipes in your book.
Yeah, now I'll give a shout out for your seasoned tofu too. So my older daughter loves the 5-spice.
Yes.
And you said you can eat it right out of the package, which is true, but I love that if you just empty all of that into a frying pan without any additional oil, because there's still some oil in that marinade, that it just crisps up and you get this, you know, crunchy texture. So if you don't like soft textures, you get crunchy texture in 30 seconds.
Right.
And I think everybody would love that. Also, you know, as someone who really wants people to cook more at home, I'm, you know, very against very processed foods. So of course, I read all package labels before I would consider buying it or consuming it. So of course, I did the same with yours. And I looked at it, nothing bad in there. All things that I will welcome in my kitchen.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it is, you know, it is a form of processing, but it's a form of processing that just makes it easier for people to eat right at home, to eat with flavor, and to, you know, I understand people are busy. I'm really busy, and there are nights when I just cannot think about preparing anything else. And that's when something like that comes in. I think also for people who are not confident yet until they use my cookbook in using spices and marinades and seasoning their food. It's all about flavor. You guys really have dialed in the flavor with this. Really, I think people who like food will like it. You know, it's not mild. You weren't tentative with it, and I really appreciate that.
No, you made a good point. So to those of you watching this, you know, if you're in a hurry and you want something that's full of spices, try our 5-spice nuggets or curry nuggets, the Moroccan, the harissa, basically all the items in your cookbook.
Yeah.
Right? You know, taste it, love it, and then go to the cookbook and cook with these spices. Yeah. And become more adventurous with these spices, because I've learned how to use them. And you know, you reminded me your comment about your daughter. There's another teenage woman on TikTok who literally was like, she was eating our nugget. She's like, I thought I was eating chicken.
Yeah.
Because they have the same texture.
Yeah.
So the curry nugget, she's like, this is curry chicken. It was so cute. So I think kids these days, that's a hope, right? They're so adventurous in their eating. Yes. And, you know, they're much more conscientious about the environment, you know, and they have parents, they're more global in their taste. So there's a lot of hope for your cookbook, for our products with the youngins.
I hope so. I hope so. It's, you know, just kind of exposure and fun, right? Experimentation.
Right. Now, what other questions do you see on there?
I don't think
maybe
I
we
saw
can
any
do
more
one more if there's another one.
I welcome them. Let's see. Yeah, no, I don't see any other questions. So
okay.
If anyone else in the last few minutes has any burning tofu or spice question, or maybe for Minh, you know, any regrets about giving up your investment banking career?
No regrets.
That's good.
Look at us. We're super healthy and happy. I
Yeah.
think I think what we should let the folks know is, you know, maybe you and I will get a chance to cook together again,
We should.
right?
I think, Minh, now that we've mastered Instagram Live, speaking of TikTok, we should get on TikTok next, which will make my kids cringe. But that's the next wave. So maybe we can cook on TikTok.
Yeah, let's do TikTok live or whatever it is, like 2-minute recipes or something.
Okay.
Let's plan on that.
All right.
So,
that sounds good.
So catch us on TikTok next. Dr. Linda Shiue and Minh Tsai. So.
Exactly.
Well, our time is up, and this is super fun. It flew by. Thank you so much to be on my very first IG Live, and congratulations again on this amazing cookbook. I need to get you to sign my copy.
I definitely will. I'm glad that, you know, things are getting better and opening up, so we'll have a chance to be in person sometime soon.
Okay. Well, thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah,
have
thanks
a lovely
everyone.
evening.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we're going off live. Let's see.